This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Security in the Sahel and stemming migrant flows top the agenda as the German Chancellor concludes her visit to West Africa. My terms for a ceasefire. We have an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister of Libya's Government of National Accord. And a powerful tropical storm makes landfall in India, leaving a trail of death and destruction. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Also coming up this hour, the International Monetary Fund says the growth rate for sub-Saharan Africa is not keeping pace with its current job requirements. And why a piece of artwork by former South African President Nelson Mandela is causing excitement in New York. We begin in West Africa, where German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been visiting Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. While in Niger, she met President Mahamadou Issoufou and the rest of the leaders of the countries which make the G5 Sahel grouping. They discussed ways to combat Islamic extremism and migration. Islamic extremism is on the rise in the region, particularly in Burkina Faso and Mali. Niger has made efforts in curbing migration, but the country's president, Issoufou, says they need more help in providing support for thousands of vulnerable people now living in camps on its territory.
We have to offer people other opportunities, other activities including agriculture, tourism and craft. We have been working on projects in these areas, and some of those projects are being funded, including by Germany.
If we want to fight traffickers and smugglers, we have to create jobs for the people of Niger. We have taken initial measures. Some German projects have been undertaken, but I totally understand that it is necessary to do more, because we have to offer opportunities to citizens in this region.
And for more insights of the German Chancellor's West Africa visit, we are joined live from Lagos by Deji Badmas. Deji, what are the major highlights of Angela Merkel's visit to those three West African countries this week?
Well, for me, I think the major highlight would be those commitments that the German leader actually made. For instance, we saw her pledging 60 million euro now to the G5 Sahel force that is supposed to be taking on combating terrorism in the region, and of course trying to stop the flow of irregular migrants now around that region. We also saw the German leader pledging $22.4 million now to Burkina Faso to help the country in terms of development. We also saw a similar pledge, this time $39 million going to Niger to help, of course, in training the police and also help to provide development and healthcare in the region. So I think it's a good one. It's a good one. But what everyone is expecting to see is that the German government follows through with those pledges. And besides, it came clearly, clearly true in all the meetings that she had, that she made the pledge now that she was going to also escalate the issue further, with her colleagues in the European Union to get them to become more committed. So clearly you could see the intention of the German government now and Mrs. Merkel to work in collaboration now with the Sahel region to address some of the issues affecting that region, especially in the area of security and of course development. And in the course of her discussion, in the course of her meetings now, the issue of climate change also came true. She traveled to the northern Malian city now of Gao, where she herself confirmed that conditions there were quite terrible and that climate change is actually wreaking havoc in that region. So, by and large, good meetings, good outing, but we wait and see how most of the discussions there come to fruition, how they follow through now with most of the issues that all the sides now committed to.
All right, let's rope in now Guy Henderson. He's live for us from Berlin. Guy, what is the significance of the tour of West Africa by the German Chancellor, and how is this shaping Merkel's engagement to the continent?
Yeah, I mean, it's another visit by the German Chancellor. She and her senior officials, Defence Minister, Foreign Minister, have all taken visits to this region in the course of the past couple of years. It's definitely becoming a focus, the Sahel region, of overall German foreign policy. She's made this new pledge, 46 million euros or so, to help bolster the security and defence forces of Burkina Faso. She's made a series of pledges for development aid on this trip and on past trips. And pledges to sort of bolster the security and defence of the whole region. Germany has this increasing presence, both in terms of its financial clout and actual boots on the ground, in terms of taking part in this, what is essentially a French-led counter-terror operation across the Sahel. Germany is part of the regional UN peacekeeping force as well, and it's also putting quite a lot of money into this G5 group of sort of Sahel countries, which are sort of forming this joint counter-terror military operation. So, Germany is definitely making this part of the world a focus of its foreign policy at the moment.
Deji, security has been a major challenge, especially in the Sahel region. What would be the likely impact of the support pledged by Germany?
Well, I think the impact would, to an extent, would be felt if, and that's a very big if those commitments, those pledges now made by the German leader now, if the government actually follows through. If, for instance, she follows through with that pledge of 60 million euro to the G5 Sahel force. We know that the G5 Sahel force, that its operation had been bogged down by poor funding. So if that 60 million euro would come, it's not as if the 60 million euro is so very significant, but at least it can do a lot. And if, as she also promised, to get the other European Union members now to commit and get the attention of world leaders to do something and follow through with the pledges that they made last year, then I think that would be something quite significant. And there's no question at all that it's not in the interest of Germany and, of course, the European Union to allow insecurity now to continue to fester in that region. And it's quite understandable also that if the insecurity situation in that region is allowed to fester, Europe might be dealing with more migrants now. I mean, we were told that in 2017 about 1 million migrants from that region actually landed in Europe through the Mediterranean Sea from Libya. So I think it's one of the reasons, of course, that the German leader is doing this. But also something very important I have to point out that came up during the meetings she had is what to do, to do with the situation in Libya, because it's now become very glaring to everyone that for as long as the situation in Libya remains intractable, so to speak, for as long as peace continue to elude Libya, then the whole region will be affected. I mean, you have light weapons, a proliferation of light weapons now everywhere, weapons flooding the entire area. So everyone understands that the Libyan situation has to be tackled, and it's good that, to hear Mrs. Merkel now say that that she's going to get her other European colleagues to do, to take, some serious action now on the situation in Libya. So let's just wait and see. The most important thing is to follow through with those pledges. And if they do follow through with those pledges, I think we'll begin to see some kind of difference on the ground.
All right. So, Guy, Deji did bring up the issue of migrants, and Merkel is proposing creating economic opportunities in Africa as a solution. Is this practical, and what assistance can Germany offer to achieve it?
Yeah, so you've got the short-term sort of phase one, if you like, which is bringing back stability, and a lot of that is security operations, counter-terror operations, that kind of thing. And then you've got the long-term plan, which is basically, as German officials put it, tackling the root causes of migration. So a kind of long-term plan which involves Germany putting a lot of development aid into this region, but also increasingly involves encouraging private sector investment and private sector partnerships. So when Germany was president of the G20 group of nations, when the summit took place here in Hamburg a couple of years ago now, Germany was leading this idea of a thing called the Compact with Africa, which was basically an idea to try and encourage private sector partnerships between German, European companies, G20 countries, and companies and companies in the region. But the big question, of course, is to what extent that kind of thing can take hold at the moment, because in many of these regions we're not talking about business yet. These are kind of lawless regions with weak governance where terrorist groups are still operating and at the moment increasingly flourishing. So yes, Germany has this long-term plan to tackle the root causes, to stop people fleeing their homes. But at the moment, the sort of prime focus appears to be bringing some stability through counter-terrorism operations, through sort of bolstering defence forces. Yes, Germany pledges money to that operation, but given its 20th century history, there's still a sort of lacking political will, if you like, to take a lead on that sort of phase one defence, counter-terror, that kind of thing.
All right, Guy Henderson live in Berlin, Deji Badmas in Lagos. Thank you both for joining us. Now, Nigerian security forces are combing parts of Katsina State in the northwest in search of a kidnapped relative of President Muhammadu Buhari. Gunmen abducted Musa Omar, an in-law to the president and a district head, late Wednesday evening. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has more.
The kidnap happened in President Muhammadu Buhari's country home, Daura, in Katsina State. Musa is a prominent man there. He's a retired customs official married to a niece of President Buhari. His daughter is married to the president's ADC. 4 gunmen invaded Musa's home at about 7 p.m. local time on Wednesday. They shot sporadically into the air before the kidnap, and the gunmen shot at locals who attempted to rescue him. His kidnappers have not contacted his family or authorities, but kidnapping for ransom has been on the rise across Nigeria. Nigeria's security forces, including the Air Force, have been combing the area, especially the border area with Niger, but with little success. The police say the total number of kidnap cases in the past months is more than 1,000. In most cases, kidnappers go after high-value targets like foreign nationals and prominent locals. Nigeria's security forces have announced several security beef-up, but kidnappers continue to strike at will and claim millions in ransom. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
The formation of a new government of national unity in South Sudan remains in limbo after the current government and opposition failed to come to an agreement during initial talks in the Ethiopian capital. They have just 10 days left of negotiating time, but the opposition is already calling for 6 more months of talks. Coletta Wanjohi reports.
For 8 months, South Sudan's 2 main warring factions have tried to seal a deal that would create a new government. But with less than a fortnight to go, the opposition says it needs 6 more months.
The security arrangement must be completed before the formation of the Artigono. And that's the agreement said, Article 2.2.1. And also the number of states, because we must go into that government not to negotiate again, but to implement the agreement as it came.
But the government says it has no reservations.
What do you mean by the government ready? If the government was not ready, then we would have not come here.
One oversight group says there are 15 major tasks that are still pending in order to achieve a total ceasefire.
Refraining from acts of sexual and gender-based violence by the parties. B. Cantonment, disarmament, screening, demobilization, selection, unification and training of forces. C. Demilitarization of civilian centers.
Other challenges include a delay in the establishment of some institutions, financial constraints and lack of coordination. The push and pull between the government of South Sudan and its opposition opens up a lot of uncertainty about the return of total peace to South Sudan. But the United Nations is warning the warring factions that there is no other option apart from peace. Colette Wanjoy, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Libya's Prime Minister of the UN-backed government in Tripoli has expressed willingness to hold dialogue, however, with conditions. In an exclusive interview with CGTN, the Prime Minister says he will only allow peace talks to resume if the Libyan National Army, loyal to Khalifa Haftar, will stop their current offensive.
The East-based LNA led by Khalifa Haftar has been leading a military campaign since early April to take over Tripoli. The leader of the UN-backed government sitting in Tripoli says LNA attacks are undermining the political process in Libya.
There are a lot of indicators that show the international community and the Security Council's members that what is happening in Tripoli is not as claimed fighting terrorism and militias. Before the ongoing Tripoli war, we are all waiting for the elections and talking about it everywhere. The Tripoli fighting, bombing and destruction have been causing serious results and bad repercussions on the humanitarian, security and political levels.
So far, more than 300 people have been killed since clashes erupted in and around Tripoli. More than 40,000 people have also been left homeless, with thousands others believed trapped in the city's southern outskirts. The government of National Accord of Libya sees a ceasefire as the solution to the unrest.
The LNA forces should end their operations and return to their place. Hence, talks about how to resume the political process might start. These fierce attacks have inflicted serious injuries on civilians, damaged infrastructure, schools, bookshops, bombed ambulances, residential neighborhoods and airports.
The international community has condemned the ongoing violence, but Sarraj says this is not enough.
We expected a more resolute position from the international community and the Security Council by calling those who are involved in this attack with their true names. This is, like what Ghassan Salama, the United Nations representative to Libya, said, a coup against legitimacy and an attempt to seize power.
Sarraj maintains that his government is not incapacitated as Haftar has made it look like. He says his government has made progress in economy, security and infrastructure development.
China was one of those countries, so we sent a committee there as a number of Chinese firms were wishing to return and resume their projects that value billions of dollars. Unfortunately, the security situation terrifies many foreign parties as they fear putting their staff at a risky situation in an unsafe area. The situation was better before Haftar's forces' assault on Tripoli. There have been many promises from countries and companies that were ready to return to the safest zones in particular. The attack took us back to square one.
Sarraj now says he's ready for peace talks, but only if the LNA forces will halt the Libya offensive. Chamgono, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Time for us to make a quick break. Here's what's still ahead. A powerful tropical storm makes landfall in India, leaving a trail of death and destruction. And why a piece of artwork by former South African President Nelson Mandela is causing excitement in New York.
On May 8th, 27 million South Africans go to the polls. Africa's most industrialized nation is just emerging from recession and still faces enormous economic challenges. Join us on Global Business Africa for a week of in-depth coverage and analysis on the state of the country's economy. A different perspective of events shaping South Africa. Africa Live. Find your voice.
2 people have died after Cyclone Fani slammed into eastern India. The powerful cyclone is bringing heavy rain and winds of up to 200 kilometers per hour. It's the biggest storm to hit the country in decades. Prior to its landfall, more than 1 million people were evacuated along the storm's projected path. Major airports have been closed in the eastern states of Odisha and West Bengal. More than 200 train services are cancelled. Authorities have put the Navy on high alert for rescue and relief efforts.
According to government estimates, around 10,000 villages and more than 50 towns line the cyclone's path, potentially affecting more than 100 million people. But the local authorities say they have taken adequate measures to weather this severe storm. Experts say it's one of India's largest evacuation exercises ahead of a natural disaster. Around 1 million people have been evacuated and are being shifted to over 4,000 shelters. The country's National Disaster Response Force, or the NDRF, has deployed around 50 teams across 3 states. India's Navy and Air Force, too, are on standby. All schools and government offices are shut in at least 13 districts in the state of Odisha. Over 200 trains are canceled, and no flights will take off or land at 2 major airports for at least 24 hours. Fishermen are also prohibited from venturing into the sea. India's biggest oil and gas producer, the ONGC, has evacuated close to 500 employees from offshore installations and moved drilling rigs to safer locations. In the state of Andhra Pradesh, too, the local government is taking no chances.
And now we are first trying to evacuate the pregnant women and the lactating mothers and particularly the old people and people in thatched houses because they are more prone to dangers.
They asked us to leave because of the cyclone.
We're returning because of the cyclone after canceling the train ticket. We were going to stay till Saturday, but now we're leaving.
Forecasters have warned of total destruction of thatched houses, uprooting of power and communication poles, and damage to crops in some areas. The storm is also expected to hit neighboring Bangladesh on Saturday. The government there has opened over 3,000 cyclone shelters in 13 coastal districts. Weather experts say the detailed measures are being taken to avoid the repeat of a super cyclone in 1999 that killed over 10,000 and left a trail of devastation across the state of Odisha. With Naya and Seth, Gary Engelbrandt for CGTN.
Meanwhile, in Mozambique, nearly 200,000 people are in need of health assistance or are at risk of contracting diseases. This follows 2 cyclones hitting the country in a 5-week period. Mozambique was reeling from the aftermath of Cyclone Idai when Cyclone Kenneth hit the northern part of the country. The World Health Organization stressed the need for rapid action to manage the risk of cholera. Parts of the country remain inaccessible in the aftermath of both cyclones.
Kenneth was the second Category 3 cyclone to hit the country within 5 weeks. Due to the lack of accessibility, the full extent of the damage to the health system is not known. At least 17 health facilities have been damaged, but this number is expected to rise. WHO is working with the Ministry of Health to carry out evaluations, and they're also working with UNICEF and have sent tents, water purification units, and other supplies.
Meanwhile, the United Nations is warning that drought conditions in Somalia could trigger a dire humanitarian crisis. The UN has now launched an appeal for $1.6 billion to address this situation.
It's being feared that without urgent action, drought conditions in Somalia could trigger a major humanitarian crisis. A 4th consecutive year of below-average rainy seasons has left around 6.2 million people in need of emergency aid. The UN has launched an appeal for $1.6 billion to address the crisis.
A major challenge right now is the underfunding of the 2019 Humanitarian Response Plan. Currently, in May, only funded to 19% for the year, which is very worrying with the current extent of the humanitarian crisis that's evolving as we see it now.
Nurta Abdi Osman was displaced by drought conditions. She came to the Halwadag camp seeking refuge, but continued to face challenges.
Since coming here, our challenges multiplied. There is an extreme shortage of water. There was no education for our children when we came, but now there is Hauladag Primary School, providing the much-needed learning opportunities for our kids. The needs of the IDPs in this camp are huge, and we need assistance from the international community.
UN officials, along with Norway's senior advisor on humanitarian affairs, visited IDP camps such as Halwadag to assess their needs. The delegation also held a meeting with the president of the Southwest state, Abdi Aziz Hassan Mohammed, to discuss how to address the growing crisis. Astatal, CGTN.
In South Africa, residents of Bacon Park, a housing project, are complaining about poor living conditions. CGTN's Astatal looks at how the residents' growing frustrations might reflect on their choices during the country's May 8th general election.
Nanyi Molloy starts off the day making breakfast for her granddaughter. She's one of the residents of Bacon Park, an ANC project aimed at addressing racial disparities in housing and land ownership. Molloy was excited when she first got the keys to her new house, but happiness turned into disappointment when she found no running water.
As you can see, I just live in this house, but these houses are leaking. We don't have running water, there are no taps inside the houses, we can't flush the toilet, and we have to use buckets for sanitation.
This housing project cost the South African government an estimated $10 million.
No one has come to check how we are coping with the disaster that we are dealing with. And the most heartbreaking part is that we don't even have electricity.
For Molloy and her neighbors, the poor living conditions will have a bearing on whether they'll participate in the upcoming elections.
When it comes to elections, they come and tell us everything and anything so that we can vote for them. But they do nothing for us. They just want us to elevate them.
I doubt that I will vote because nothing is fine here. We are always voting, but the government doesn't want to make us happy.
South Africans will go to the polls on May 8th. Issues like proper housing and provisions of other social amenities will be critical issues for many voters. Astatal, CGTN.
For the first time, a work of art by former South African President Nelson Mandela is being auctioned. The sale in New York is part of a larger collection of modern and contemporary art from the African continent. Auction house Bonham says it reflects the growing interest from U.S. collectors to buy into today's African art world. As CGTN's Nick Harper reports from New York, the work features a drawing of the door of Mandela's cell.
It's a sight Nelson Mandela knew well. The cell door, Robben Island, is one of only 22 sketches the former president created of his time in prison, and the only one to come up for auction.
This is a work by one of the most famous men of the 20th century. It has an enormous poignancy for what it depicts, because we all know, he had 27 years in prison. So what it represents is probably greater than what it depicts. It's an extraordinary work.
The piece, which Mandela kept in his personal collection, with the auction fees added, fetched more than $112,000. This auction included several dozen works of art from right across Africa. Nigerian artist Demus Noka's painting, Children on Cycles, sold for more than $225,000. Lost since 1961, it was found discarded under a bed in Boston. This throne by Giancarlo Mabunda, made from deactivated weapons, including mortars and AK-47s from the Mozambican Civil War, went for over $6,000. Modern African art, that's anything produced after 1945, is very different to earlier tribal artwork. Since then, artists have used the so-called European style of oil on canvas or watercolours, and this auction coincides with growing interest of African artists among American collectors. Gallery owner Lewis Long has watched buyers drive the market by simply showing an interest themselves.
They are creating awareness
for their friends. I mean, it's one thing to walk in my home and see this work, and it makes you want one as well.
Bonhams also attributes the growing US interest to an acknowledgement of ancestry.
We've got a lot more collectors coming in, and a lot of those are collectors with maybe African American heritage who are deciding to buy a work of contemporary art from Africa and perhaps reflecting the heritage they have.
With its breadth of work, Bonhams called this the only sale of its kind globally. And with collectors buying big, the African art world appears to be a picture of health. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.
Let's now head to Senegal, where the capital Dakar has been hosting a contest aimed at promoting and rewarding young women intellectuals. Here's more on that.
It was a battle of brain power. 18 contestants selected from higher learning institutions were here to lay claim to the title of the Queen of Colleges. And each participant tried hard to prove their prowess and knowledge in various categories, including the traditional African outfits parade and the hidden but unique individual talents. They also had to give a 2-minute speech each in defense of women's rights in the current African social setting. At the end of it all, Safitou Gwenonyang emerged tops, and $3,500 was just but part of the reward.
This win is a result of sleepless nights, days of hard work, and many, many more personal sacrifices. As a winner, I will seek to encourage young women in Senegal by showing them that they are leaders in their own rights and that they are key factors in the developments of our regions and the whole of Senegal.
The 5 top contenders will get technical and financial support to start businesses of their choice.
Last year, I received a grant which I used to start a project with. I make African bags and other accessories which I sell at a profit. Since then, I'm financially independent. I have bigger plans for my future.
The annual Queens of Colleges competition is aimed at encouraging young girls to join and stay in school.
Such contests not only encourage girls to stay in school, it also anchors them for future success in fields of science and entrepreneurship.
Despite enjoying relative success on the economic front, Senegal witnesses low number of girls joining school annually. Only 1 in every 5 girls in primary school proceeds to secondary every year. This is blamed on retrogressive cultures such as early marriages, which are still prevalent in rural areas. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
And coming up in business news, the International Monetary Fund says the growth rate for sub-Saharan Africa is not keeping pace with its current job requirements.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The International Monetary Fund is forecasting a marginal rise in growth rate for sub-Saharan Africa from the current 3.5% to an average 4% in 2019. However, it has warned the growth rate is not keeping pace with the current job requirements in the region. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more.
Officials from the IMF releasing economic growth outlooks for the sub-Saharan region in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, only weeks after it held its spring meeting in the US. The bank is forecasting faster growth rates in African economies less dependent on natural resources. And there are only 21 countries out of 45 that fit in that bracket. The IMF expects growth in those countries to top 5% above the region's average of 4%. while resource-dependent countries like Nigeria and South Africa are expected to record slower growth rates as commodity prices plummet in global markets.
One challenge with this, of course, is that at 4% for the region as a whole, again, the growth rate is not high enough to create the millions and millions of jobs that need to be created in the coming years.
Nigeria and South Africa account for 2/3 of the region's total population. The IMF is urging governments in both countries to remove policies holding back productivity. It's also recommending increased public investment, improved debt management, and improvement in revenue mobilization, plus enhancing exchange rates flexibility.
7 out of 45 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are in debt distress, needing some kind of direct efforts to address the very high levels of debt. 6 of these countries are very fragile countries. These are Republic of Congo, Eritrea, the Gambia, Sao Tome and Principe, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. And 2 out of these 7 are oil exporters, Republic of Congo and South Sudan.
At the current growth rate, the IMF says the sub-Saharan region can only generate about 12 million jobs annually. That's far less than the number of new entrants in the job market, estimated at 20 million per year. For the region to keep pace with job demands, sub-Saharan Africa must attain an average 6% economic growth rate by 2030. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
To the South African city of Cape Town, which has been hosting what is being billed as Africa's premier decor and design expo. Exhibitors are showcasing the finest and latest lifestyle trends. Let's take a closer look.
This year, African culture and color was the driving inspiration behind one of the most widely anticipated decor events on the continent. Decorex Cape Town 2019 was held under the theme, Designing for Africa Feels Like Home. Many visitors were delighted by new ways to bring out the best in their homes with art, furniture, rugs and lighting.
I love coming to Decorex to come and see the whole idea, new ideas and what's new on the market. So I love coming here every year.
Miles Adams, one of the exhibitors at Decorex, brought the honeycomb board to the expo. Recyclable and sturdy for crating.
I think the whole sustainable solutions is becoming more popular, and what we found a gap in the market was it started with crating. Crating ultimately was done mostly in timber, so we've had to bring in an alternative where you could reuse the crate, but at the same time it needs to be strong, and then once it's used it can be then recycled again.
Adams borrowed the concept from bees. The bee's honeycomb structure is very strong and once laminated, gives the product core strength. There are little cells inside the bigger structure and those cells keep the honeycomb board rigid. Sustainable lifestyle options were a very important attraction for visitors at Decorex this year. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
South Africa is the largest tourism economy in Africa. New data from the World Travel and Tourism Council shows that the industry contributed 1.5 million jobs in 2018, generating almost $30 billion for the country's economy. That figure represents 8.6% of all economic activity in South Africa. Despite challenges regarding visas, ease of access for key source markets, security and the recent drought, the sector continues to thrive. Renee Delcam reports.
During the apartheid years, overseas arrivals in South Africa were largely made up of people visiting family members in the country. But there's been steady growth in the sector over the past 25 years.
Since 1994, we've seen quite astronomical growth in tourism arrivals in South Africa, both from the African continent and from overseas markets. What we've seen in the last few years is very impressive growth from both North America and South America, and of course India and China surfacing as potentially enormous source markets for South African tourism.
About 10 million international tourists visit South African shores every year. The government has set itself a target of doubling this figure by the year 2030, but admits it's already falling short. of its target. The South African tourism sector has been adversely affected by negative factors such as stringent visa requirements, which were introduced in 2015 and has since been relaxed, a notoriously high crime rate, and devastating drought conditions in the tourist mecca of Cape Town in 2018.
People were worried that Cape Town might run out of water. It wasn't going to happen, but of course many people changed their travel plans, and the consequence was that we had negative growth in international tourist arrivals in Cape Town. Similarly, perceptions of crime by any global standards for tourists and the kinds of things they do, South Africa is a safe place. Nonetheless, perceptions matter, and they have dampened tourist arrivals in our country.
South African tourism employs over 600,000 people, with a value chain of around 1.5 million people. And the government has identified it as a sector with huge potential.
Our forecast ahead is a very positive forecast, but right now, if we have to be honest, we're a bit flat right now. We're not where we thought we would have been a couple of years ago. But at the same time, we're aware of the factors, addressing the factors, and therefore we anticipate really good future growth.
And it's hoped that this growth will translate into more much-needed jobs in South Africa.
We just simply have a very beautiful, exquisitely beautiful country with a diversity of offerings. So from day one, I knew that this is something that can be sold.
Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Last year, the number of Chinese visitors to Dubai surpassed 850,000. China is now the fourth largest source of tourists for the Emirates. And as Jacob Greaves reports, Dubai is only stepping up its efforts to attract more visitors from China.
From skyscrapers to luxury islands, Dubai has long promoted itself as a global tourism hub. But with the ambitious target of 20 million visitors by 2020, it needs burgeoning markets. And one appears to be China, with a 12% increase last year.
The Chinese tourism market, as I mentioned earlier, is growing at about 28%. We think within the next few years, UAE should be receiving anywhere between 1.7 to 2.1 million visitors from China. So as a result of that tourism, we think the whole UAE tourism industry is going to get a huge boost from the Chinese tourist market.
Here at the annual Arabian Tourism Market, the event has hosted its first Arab-China summit, with how to court Chinese visitors a key talking point. One major reason is spending power. According to the latest figures from the UN's World Tourism Organization, in 2017, Chinese visitors were the top global spenders. That's by over $100 billion more than their closest rivals, American citizens. And there's already been a number of recent attempts to make Dubai a more attractive destination. Chinese travellers can now visit the UAE visa-free. Last year, Dubai established its first 24-hour Chinese language radio station. And from major malls to the world's tallest building, 2019 has seen a host of tourist hotspots launch Chinese mobile payment platforms such as WeChat Pay.
Any destination or the retailers or incoming tour operators want to attract the Chinese, make it easier for them to pay. Because comparing, if one says, sorry, we don't take Alipay, and the other says, yes, we take mobile pay, then the one who takes mobile pay definitely get the business. Because, that's just simple, because they don't have to transfer the money, exchange. There's still certain restriction on foreign exchange, but there's no restriction on spending local money on their phone or whatever mobile, and the bank takes care of the transaction to the retailers.
In numbers, Chinese visitors still rank below the likes of India, Saudi Arabia and Britain. But encouraging more Chinese visitors is important as the Emirate gears up to host Expo 2020. And amid signs overall tourism might be slowing. Government statistics claim overnight visitors increased by around 1% last year, hitting 15.9 million. That's compared to over 6% growth in 2017. With the clock ticking on Dubai's 2020 goals, more efforts to reel in China's jet setters are likely on the horizon. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. Choreographers and dancers from different countries showcase their talents in a captivating festival in Senegal.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A radio station host is defying high odds to battle Boko Haram's extremist ideology. With programming in the local Kanuri and Hausa languages, Dandal Kura radio station seeks to inform communities around the Lake Chad Basin in spite of possible dire consequences.
Every morning, Fatima comes to Dandal Kura radio station in Maiduguri, located in northern Nigeria. She isn't playing the latest hits. Instead, she gives her listeners across the Lake Chad Basin information about human rights and land laws. She also talks about the Boko Haram insurgency, denouncing the group's radical Islamic views.
I have a passion for it because the radio, most especially the Dandal Kura radio, is a radio which is based for the voice of the Lake Chad Basin, most especially those people that are affected by the insurgency. And Dandal Kura is to broadcast in two voice, Kanuri and Hausa language.
With an estimated 10 million listeners, Fatima and Dandal Kura radio station have a wide-reaching audience. Among them are extremists who have sent the radio station tapes decrying their operations and even threatening to behead the women who work there. For this reason, many stations in the area avoid talking about the insurgency.
Quite sure we have a large number of media outlets in this region and these states alone, but they don't want to talk about the insurgency or terrorism because of their self-security.
Some listeners appreciate the station's efforts.
Dandal Kura Radio is running a program on peace building, and they enlighten people, especially about the insurgency. They talk about how they should surrender and embrace peace.
Despite the threats from militants, Fatima remains determined.
It is not necessary that until the police or the soldier come and stay wherever you are, that means that you are secure. No. Even a person as a human being, there is some ethics that you also be guided so that you feel that you are secure.
Northern Nigeria has been heavily affected by the Boko Haram insurgency, which began in 2009. Fatima and Dandal Kura hope to fight such extremist ideologies by using the airwaves. Astatal, CGTN.
Let's head to Senegal, where the 2019 International World Dance Festival recently concluded. Artists, choreographers and dancers from different countries showcased their talents through creative performances. Here is more on that.
It was a festival that involved 7 dance companies, each with different dance troupes. Audiences were treated to 4 days of well-choreographed dances, touching on different themes. The International World Dance Festival is Senegal's biggest of its kind. This year's event was the 10th, and it was themed around African creativity in honor of Senegalese scholar Cheikh Anta Diop.
We need to show that there's a whole generation of young Africans who are ready to showcase their talents, be it in culture or elsewhere. Our objective is to offer a platform to enable them to showcase their work.
Senegalese youth tend to change their original dance because they're influenced by the West. As a result, they are less and less familiar with our traditions. I'm happy to be able to share this experience with some of them.
Teams from United States, Senegal, Congo and Gabon took part. Apart from stage performances, panelists also explored ways of enabling more participation by women in future dance festivals.
Dance goes beyond borders and cultures and language, and so yeah, it's really beautiful to see it all coming together. And again, I think that initially we think there are a lot of differences, but when I look at dance, I see a lot of similarities with rhythm, musicality, and just joy. And yeah, you can find that all over the world. And so it's nice to see everyone coming together.
More dance festivals are in the pipeline as Senegal seeks to entrench its position as Africa's cultural capital. Wilkisanyabwa, CGTN.
Coming up in sports. Caster Semenya prepares for Doha Diamond League amid the setback of the IAAF testosterone ruling.